All right, here we are back again, Jen and
Good again.
Kyle.
Howdy.
And Kyle is in full podcaster cosplay mode here with the headphones and the mic. So
Cosplay.
we welcome
Yes, these
Kyle.
are these are styrofoam headphones. They're not really functional. They're just costume. I 3D printed these last night for this episode. No, my earbuds went down. So here we go. Anyway,
So just before we hit record, we were just chatting about things that are on our minds, and I mentioned that I've been reading more this week and last week about awe, AWE, the experience of awe, which is not new for me. I mean, it's a topic that I've studied and read about, so this isn't like a discovery, but more that it's just been on my mind lately, and I don't know why. I just follow the energy of things, and so I was saying this to Kyle, and Kyle was like, "Oh, we should just hit record before we
just
both
hit it.
kind of riff on this." So this
Yeah.
felt like what we would start by riffing on and see where it takes us. The the specifics of this and the way they tie into things you and I talk about here are that I think a lot of humans who work in fields or are interested in topics of the type that we talk about here have likely encountered some of this work on awe in the last decade. Maybe not, but it does seem like it has showed up in articles and think pieces lately. If it hasn't, I highly encourage anybody to go Google your way through some interesting recent studies on awe as an experience that can have different impacts on some of the kind of things that we're all trying to achieve together around, desirable outcomes for broader systems of humans and the ecosystems in which they work and play and live. Nonetheless, the reason I brought it up with Kyle earlier, and maybe we'll start here, is there is some research that suggests that having an experience of awe, which I guess we can also unpack the definition of later if we need to, but largely it's exactly what you listener know the word awe to mean. So something that could be an experience with, nature or spiritual or religious, or can be mundane, but anything that kind of just creates that moment of like, and there's usually an association with vastness, with profundity, creates that kind of attention for connectedness, interconnectedness, entanglement. There's rigor to this that we don't have to get into, but experiences with awe seem to help or make it easier for people to feel comfortable with or tolerate, uncertainty and ambiguity in and around the context in which that experience of awe happens. Now, I haven't done like the deepest dive on this, so we're both going to be operating at surface level. So congrats everybody. You're about to get some garbage science conversation here. But I just thought that was interesting because as folks know, that notion of uncertainty tolerance, which to me is a red herring anyway, and there's such interest these days around how to help people be more comfortable with ambiguity and avoid premature convergence and blah 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 blah. And I just think, well, awe fits in here too. I'm intrigued by awe for the possible impact that it can have in that sense, that feelings of awe can help people feel more. Well, I say this like it's something you would engineer. Here, let's
Right.
have an awe experience, and now you'll feel more comfortable with uncertainty. And right, that's not
Right.
the point. The
I'm going
point
to
is
introduce awe into
there's a
this workshop.
correlation, right? Having an experience of awe can result in a sort of higher tolerance for or just acceptance of uncertainty, perhaps because of the way that it kind of makes people feel more entangled and interconnected. And then, of course, that begs the question for many around, well, can you induce this? And this ties back to stuff that I've been working on separately around, those moments that aporia, disorienting dilemma, the encounter with difference, problem posing education, as Freire called it, like these moments that are where you just go, wait a minute, and it forces. One of the phrases is like mental accommodation, right? It forces you. It can't fit. This moment or this experience can't fit in your existing schema. So instead of adjusting it to fit into your schema, it kind of forces you to now adjust and update your schema to accommodate this new or vast or profound experience. And so, people always want to go after, well, okay, let's engineer some experiences of awe so that everyone can just be kind of cool and complexity conscious. And that ain't it, folks. But there's interesting stuff to just understand about the phenomenon. So I've laid out a giant kind of like board here. Where do you want to go?
There were a few things that are coming up for me, but one, you've heard me say a few times that I say that I'm like complexities ambulance chaser. I'm looking for people that have run their head against the wall a few times out of frustration and are just kind of like, screw it, I give up. Like, let's try something different. We've tried everything else. And that's a way of putting it. But what you're talking about is a little bit closer to what I think I'm really looking for, because that ambulance arrives when the routine deviates and something breaks down. Now an emergency happens and we're forced to acknowledge that something else, there's a new reality that has just introduced itself. And it might be temporary, but we're dealing with some sort of emergency or some sort of injury or some sort of shakeup to some extent. And the ambulance isn't a great metaphor for all of that. But what I use the metaphor is to say that people have finally reckoned with the exhaustion of the routine not fulfilling the expectations anymore. And it's not awe that they're experiencing. They're not floored by this amazement. They're not captivated by what they're witnessing here. They're fatigued. They're overwhelmed. They're feeling futility. They're desperate in some cases, but they're still having that very humbled moment of, my reality pointed me in this direction, and I'm finding that that path leads to nowhere at the moment. And or at least I'm not seeing an end to the path the way that I thought that path was leading. And so now I'm willing to walk off the path or find another one somewhere else. So I see that as an interesting adjacency to what you're talking about.
Yeah, I'm glad you said
there's something fundamental in here.
Yes. Yeah. I'm glad you said adjacency though, because it's not the same.
No, it's not.
I'm like already taking notes. Because what I heard, okay, to build on that, right?
Mm-hmm.
That notion of like, so anomaly
Mm-hmm.
is not the same as awe. And at the same time, also the experience of, I kind of hear themes of like, when you start to recognize that something is not fit for purpose anymore, or something's losing its fitness for tools, processes, ways of working, interactions, collaboration, right? These things they're feeling like something's changing because they're losing their fitness for what we're, quote, using them for. This is an overly reductionist way of talking about it, but you know what I mean. So like, there's a dynamic there that is, to my mind, not really related to awe, but what I'm hearing the connection being that having an experience of awe can be a contributor to a recognition of or growing awareness of something like that. Or it can't spark, or I would say even like shortcut it, which is kind of the thing I wonder with people when they get interested in awe, or some of the think pieces I've seen. It's like, here's all this incredible stuff around this one little neat piece of the human experience, and then it's like immediately this is our lightning bolt, to like shortcut to get to all the people with you and the ambulance chaser metaphor are trying to go scoop up. And I know we have talked, like I remember on one of our episodes saying something to the extent of like, I'm kind of just in search of those wait what moments. And like sometimes one of the sort of categories of the wait what moment for me is awe. And it's not the only, but there's I don't know, there's something interesting there. But where I want to dig is like you're describing a moment, right? For someone, a Kairos. And I hear in your description the Kairos is in the person. And I think that's in contrast to this other notion of the Kairos being in the field or in the context or in everything happening around as an entangled ecosystem of things.
Yeah.
So I would like to hear you say more.
No, that's a good call. That's probably how I was phrasing that. But it's not, is it? It's in that relationship. There has to be some sort of acknowledgement of it, because I think right. This is what we call denial all the time. Is the world is shifting, and there's the blinders that we put on to say no thanks. I'm not interested in acknowledging these things. So there is we've got the ability as individuals to acknowledge these things or not, to tell ourselves different truths. to shape worldviews that supports some core other belief. Yeah, I'll sit with that for a moment.
Well, I mean, what you might call denial, I might say that's just me being consistent, man. That's
Sure,
just me holding true to my values. No, I'm just kidding.
without a doubt, you're
One
absolutely right.
man's denial is another man's well, so and part of why I even bring that point up is because, I'm the same way. I think in a conversation about this, it's easy, not in a lazy way, but it's just the natural default to talk about an experience of awe being inside a person because like we've all experienced it. And to your point earlier too about you were kind of talking about urgency. I think less about like chronological urgency or urgency around like something needs to be addressed quickly, but more just that something feels meaningful and significant. Like we all have had these experiences, and sometimes they're threat-based experiences. Weather events are one of those categories that a lot of research knows that people will describe some of the most awful, awe-inspiring, like awe-full, right? Being threatening events and events that really kind of put you and make you feel small in a good way and entangled and interconnected in a way that doesn't necessarily have a value judgment, but they don't have to be threatening, obviously. But you can't help but think about it internally, your own experiences, and if I think about experiences of awe that I have had and have, because I feel like I am a person, this is maybe a separate chat. I feel like I walk through the world and experience awe on a daily basis. Now, how much of that is a practice of, noticing, cultivating a habit of mind that you see awe in very mundane things? I don't know, but not every one of the moments where I have a feeling internally of awe, it results in me having an epiphany or me shifting my values or changing my worldview per se, but it might reinforce the things that we talk about on here so often that people seem to be chasing, right? Which is getting more comfortable with the simply open-ended and entangled nature of the work we do and getting loosening the grip on outcome-driven and target-driven methods to do things. And I can't help but think about that happening inside me, inside Jen, because all I know of it is my personal experience. But if I try to challenge myself in the same way that I just called it out in response to you, I think, okay, well, what is it if it's not inside me, right? Obviously it is, there's a relational capacity here that is me inside of or as part of in this wider thing whereby awe is happening. Again, it's easy to think of natural, phenomenon like some crazy rainbow or some, beautiful view or natural phenomenon are just easy to grab, I think, for all of us. But beyond even just to say, I can't experience awe as an isolated entity, it has to be in relation to, and if there's an interaction happening here and such between me and all the other pieces and parts that are being like co-constituted by the experience and blah, blah, blah. But what else is it really? I mean, I think there's more than that even. I think there's I don't want to get into it, but in too much detail here today, but one of Dave Snowden's recent posts does mention he's extending the estuary metaphor a bit. If you guys don't have any familiarity with this, don't worry about it. But he talks about a floodplain or a flood event. If an estuary does have, in those once in a however many years kind of 100-year storm kind of situation and a flood, and you think about those events and what they enable and what they make possible by virtue of that event, and that event being a metaphor for organizational and human interaction as this estuary. What does that flood event enable or reconfigure as far as both material things and attention and noticing? And so that to me is way more interesting to think about than the awe that one human has when they see a double rainbow and they're like, holy shit, dude, holy, double rainbow. I'm intrigued by this. I haven't done as much, like I said, of a deep dive into the phenomenon of awe experiences. And some of what I've seen is stuff that's kind of from popular psychology too. So it's hard to put a lot of stock in studies that have been done with 20 people and then someone wrote a book about it. But yeah, I don't know. It's because this to me is so tempting to want to break apart into what creates the conditions for awe? We've all been trained to know we can't say, how do we engineer it? Okay, fine. The next question is, how do we create the conditions for more awe experiences? And even that to me, I'm like, guys, no.
Yeah.
But I'm
That,
curious, like, where your brain is going on that.
so I had to pull up the article that I just threw on Substack last week or the week before, the words
All your words.
the words that don't translate directly to English, because I knew there were a couple in there around awe. And there's an Arabic word, and I'm going to butcher the pronunciation. Apologies in advance. Kashaya, I think. And it's awe mixed with reverence and gentle fear, specifically the felt awareness of something immeasurably greater than oneself, but closer to trembling wonder than dread.
Okay. Isn't that just awe?
I would think so, but that's not. I don't feel dread when I'm thinking when I'm looking at a. There's no gentle fear looking at a double rainbow. To your point, so you had to clarify that. This is specifically saying it's kind of in between. It's somewhere.
Okay.
It's a bit of both, and so. Like when I'm on a boat looking at the ocean, I kind of get that like, holy shit, the magnitude of this is fucking is terrifying, but also
Maybe,
this is amazing at the same time.
okay. Maybe for me, awe is like the top level category. And that word you just said isn't different from or distinct from awe the way we use the word awe. To me, it's just maybe a subcategory underneath it, or a very specific instantiation of the experience of awe.
Very much so. Yep. But this is where there's a bluntness to our one word, but we have to sort of subcategorize to
You
get
know
to
what's
that.
happening?
When
We're
you
going to end
say,
up on a tangent about the word, the glossary that you made. We're going to end up on a tangent on this, I think.
okay,
Because tell me why your instinct was to go look for those words that mean awe from that
I
list.
just happened to notice that they were there, but I also you had to do a bit of defining of awe. We're talking about what awe is before we can really continue with the conversation. And that's, to me, that's that bluntness of the word, but it's also the relationship and context of what we're talking about, establishing it between you and I, but also tossing it into the ether of anyone other than anyone else that's listening there. So it's obviously the dance that we do. But
Okay, this is really
having
interesting.
an
Go ahead.
interesting sort of, I don't know. Uh, this is interesting to me because I find a dexterity in having new words like this, or at least access to it, to find that people have specifically defined these things, and there's an etymology to it, and that etymology has a whole life around it as well. And so, being able to refer to those things as being culturally situated within a language is it's more powerful than just a word by itself. And I think we take that for granted in our own native tongue. At least I do with English a lot of times. But it's not a validation so much as it's an, I don't know, it's an interesting, it's, how do I want to describe this? There's an interesting structure there that I was unrecognizable as a native English speaker, and it's a true structure that's kind of impressive to stumble over.
What do you mean by true?
Well, I mean, like to find that all of these words have a history. They have specific contexts. They're relatable in particular cultures, and we say love, and we say I love pizza and I love my kids, and it means all the same thing. We have a very blunt way of using a lot of our words. We're very articulate in a lot of other ways, but a lot of our words are very blunt. But there are when you find like the Greek language, I think, has 5 different words for love. One of them is a verb. The other 4 are nouns, if I'm not mistaken. And like that sort of thing allows just a different navigation of what exactly you're talking about, and also what context these things exist in. And well, I don't have to explain, why language exists and where, but that structure to me is, when are some of these things appropriate, when they're not. When we get into our sort of semantic infighting in our circles, what that looks like in a completely different language, in a completely different context, to me is really interesting, because it shifts that argument in a way that I don't totally understand, but I want to know more about.
Well, the last part is intriguing in a separate level. I want to come back to it, but okay, this is interesting. But goodbye to awe. We're done with that, because we're talking about it'll come back. It'll come back. It's actually related.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Because we haven't talked about. So for those who don't know, Kyle recently, you can Google his Substack. He compiled a number of words from other languages that kind of do that thing that he's alluding to, where because of history and context, they have words that describe. Everyone mostly knows the joke. There's usually some long Japanese or German word that describes some like really unique feeling that we just don't have a word for. But this is more elegant. And when you shared it, I was like, oh, this is intriguing. But I'll be really blunt with you, dude. I have no interest in that stuff. None.
Interesting.
I love language. Love it. You see, I do it in my writing a lot. I'll pull on etymologies to be creative with things.
Yep.
There is no part of me. I did read it. Don't get me wrong. But there's no part of me that feels the sort of intrinsic draw towards it that I see you and others feel. Like we were chatting in one of our recent, we were with some other folks on a call, and somebody had like even printed out one of the words that came to us because it was that meaningful to them, right? So I see it, but it's like, for me, no. And now, so why is that? So I was listening as you were talking, because actually what you're describing kind of hits on a couple things. And I find this intriguing. So one is the way you're describing, like blunt, like take our word love. Yeah, I love my kids and I love pizza are really two different things. And the word love is really doing a lot of work there. And so you're using it, I guess, bluntly. I'll accept that. But I don't think it's clumsy, because no word is doing its work, as you basically have also just said, in a contextless way. So there's a level of shared history, context of the language, of culture, of the way that we express different feelings, that the word love in this case is basically serving two completely different purposes in those sentences. And it's effective for most people. Now, unless, again, if someone's maybe not a native English speaker or has any number of different types of things in the brain or otherwise that would make it so that meaning is not conveyed. But it's like the meaning's riding along in the sidecar of the word, even though it's not visible, right? And I'm intrigued by the idea that our language just has love, versus, say, the Greek words for love, or, any other more. I just wrote down like scalpel, like you're looking for something that gets to a finer grain, or does the work of refining what we mean. And I don't necessarily read that you mean it this way, but what I hear in this, and what I find to be true with words like the list you made, those words come from other languages and cultures that aren't mine, that I'm not part of. So I don't possess that context.
Sure.
And I'm relying on a translator to tell me in the longer definition of the word that you have to say when you give me this elegant, beautiful Arabic word, and then say it's this kind of awe with this modifier, and this modifier. It's cool to know that word exists. And it helps probably in the point you made at the end, if their goal is to like reframe a conversation or to just do that weird little perspective change, which is super cool to do. But there's a part of me that's like, have you really found a word that can do what you're saying and claiming? Not you, one can claim and say that a word like this does, when you only actually know what that word is conveying by virtue of the translation, which is itself that longer, blunter description that we're claiming tautologically that this word is eliminating the need for. Anyway, I'm not like mounting.
No. This is love this.
I find this really interesting, because I absolutely I'm not without my own special words from other languages that I love and like. So don't get me wrong. But to have like say that glossary kind of compiled just as an interesting like pour through it and one of them might stand out to you and like figure out why. That's no different than people who are into tarot or divination or oracle card decks. It's like pick one. I'm saying in this use case. I'm not saying the whole purpose. I'm just saying for me, that would probably be the most meaningful thing would be as I scan this, which one stands out to me on any given day and why, rather than I'm going to hunt for a word that really captures what I'm looking for. Because here's why. And then I promise I'm like bringing this around to the other part of this. When we were describing awe shortly, a little bit ago, I had to use a lot of words, and I think that there's almost a bit of a Goldilocks thing happening here where I will use too many words because I have to kind of, parse and add the modifiers and da-da-da-da. So when we were describing awe, but the particular kind of awe, that it is not this and is that or whatever. And one sort of counter to that is to find the single word that exists out there that captures all of that nuance and richness in a word, because that experience with all that nuance and richness has been shared by enough people in a culture that they can use the single word as a shortcut for it. But if I don't have that experience, and that word's not a shortcut for anything for me, and you've kind of got two extremes. One is we're using lots of words to modify other words that might be too blunt, or we've got a single word that is like a precise and tuned scalpel that can just do the thing that it needs. It's going to make the safest, cleanest cut with no possible, whatever. And to me, that's like the wrong other end of the polarity, or like the wrong extended sort of, it's the wrong thing to look for. My preference is not to, I said this to somebody the other day, which is why this comes up, is not to look for the right word, but it's to look for something else entirely to convey it. Often a metaphor or something more aesthetic or poetic. In fact, we got to get our boy Wes on here one of these days, because I was chatting with him about this a little bit too. So like, for example, if I was trying to convey something about that experience of awe, and for whatever reason felt like the jumbling and the fumbling and the trying to hold all the different ways I need to modify the word to like make sure it kind of makes sense and comes through, and I'm like dropping words and ideas and stuff's falling on the floor, instead of reaching for some other word, I'd rather find a poem or a metaphor that like transmits just through a different channel rather than a more precise version of the existing channel. And I don't know that I've talked about this with many folks because A, when does this ever fucking come up? But B, my sense is that people do really like those words from other languages. They hit something that just misses for me. So am I the weirdo? Like, are we the baddies? Am I the weirdo?
This is fascinating. So a couple things I'm thinking, which you were talking about precision. I heard you say heuristic. And you closed with "Are we the baddies?" which is the
Yes.
like we're talking memes at the end of the day in some cases where we're finding shortcuts to express larger ideas. And the word itself that I'm pulling in here it's not so much like I'm going to walk into the room and say I'm feeling a bit of kashaya at the moment, because that's not going to go anywhere. I'm going to do exactly what you're talking about. I'm going to find the right metaphor or the right description. I'm going to use all the English words that surround and add the conditions to describe the thing that I wanted to get to in the first place anyway. But what I heard that person saying that pulled out the printout was, I found some validation in this language. I found that structure and realized there was a place to go rally. A lot about what I hear Miranda Fricker talk about in these rally points, and that once we finally develop the language, we can all sort of collect around them and say, yeah, me too, I get it. We don't have to use all the words and try to match our stories and our metaphors. Yes, this is great, but there is a heuristic that has finally emerged from this. And this isn't quite that, because it's not the word emerged from getting through the stories. I'll head that off
Like,
before
good, okay.
it's written
We're
all over
already
your
doing
face.
like 4 level. Okay, then I'll
Yes,
just pass
that is
that.
a different practice, and that is essential in a lot of the stuff that we do on a regular basis. But it is, I think this is part of that same muscle, is that exploration of when you say X, what exactly do you mean? It's part of the same muscle that says, is there a word for this? Is there a validation to this? To just even this feeling. The the naming of emotions as just being a naming of a physiological response is a really powerful way of finding your own agency. It's being able to say, I recognize this thing, and now I can sort of be in it at a different level. I'm not just feeling this nebulous stuff. I'm now finding that other people acknowledge this, and I can relate to it, and so it puts it in a different frame so that I can navigate through it. That particular word we're talking about was, and I'm going to butcher this as well, it was a Swedish word called resferber. And it means the excitement that you feel before you take a trip. It's the airport feeling of I'm going on a trip, but also a bit of fear of going into an unknown before an adventure. A bit of the anxiety of like, did I pack enough? Did I remember to lock my doors at home? All that kind of stuff. It's the combination of holding both of those things. And again, I might be taking English for granted, and I'm certain I do because of how normalized and sort of room temperature it is as a native speaker. But I don't think we have a lot of really good words for holding two things in contrast very well. But we feel it with regularity, and we have to express it in a lot of different ways. But to find like,
Why do
and
we need words for it?
well, again, I don't know that we need necessarily a specific word, but I also think it's not so much that we need the word. I think, you and I know, are sort of are very comfortable acknowledging, hey, we're in tension, and this is a okay place to be. It's actually kind of a special place to be in a lot of cases. But we talk to a lot of people that are like, "Can you just sit with the tension?" And absolutely not. Let's
Can
get
you
to it.
sit with your discomfort?
Right, right,
Bleh,
right,
don't ever say that to me.
right.
Yes, I can. I'm not going to use those words. Anyway, sorry, go
Well,
ahead.
yes, that's exactly it. So the this doesn't ask that anymore. Being able to say there are structures there that are acknowledged, that it's kind of like that first stumbling on some of this language of complexity and epistemic injustice and that sort of stuff, where I finally went, yes, this is what I've been trying to say for a long time. I didn't have the words for. I did need the words to sort of unlock that. Finding a Swedish word is going to be very different than being able to sort of output this, but it is not entirely different. It's in the same realm. And I'm not trying to convince you,
Oh, no, I
but
know that.
what you were saying kind of sparked that. So yeah,
Yeah. It's sort of just an interesting, I mean, this is just, I think we're both like processing stuff out loud, right? That's the point. I also forgot to turn my notifications off. Sorry. We're just gonna turn that off. There's just something here about, so take awe again, because part of what I find compelling about an experience of awe is that frequently no words. I have no words. That experience. You've used the experience. I mean, the movie Contact, like the should have said a poet or whatever, right?
Yeah.
That scene, which I have criticized for its other uses in our conversations, but like it
Yes.
works here, right? But so this is not like an indictment of everything that you're describing, I think really, really aptly, around what is powerful and what is appealing about knowing that there are other means by which to share and invite being seen and to see others and to find some kind of communion or community, or like the rallying point phrase, all of that is true and I think powerful about language. But like I'm like outside of that here with my thinking. Like I'm like not, so there's, when I say outside of it, I should probably be clear. I think the to me, in my personal Gen experiences, the most functional and compelling and useful examples of that are actually ones where there are no words, and that is found through non-verbal ways. And I don't mean like profound experiences like we're all high watching a sunset. I just mean like we are collaborating on something that might be extremely mundane, and yet something happens or some result is occurring. Forget the profound awe stuff. I just mean there's a way for that rallying point to be recognized in the doing. Maybe even almost in the I don't want to say post hoc, but like in the reflective recognition that holy shit, we have this thing now, it has emerged, rather than the anticipatory, the word itself. And these are just two different uses of what we're talking about with words and describing of things. But it's almost kind of like, this is the dumbest metaphor, but where I go snowboarding is like is a teaching mountain. They have a lot of lessons and classes and things that they do. And so every morning I go out to, when I'm there, you know, my husband and I go get in line for our first run of the day, and we get in the line at the lift, and off to the right are all these flags that are planted, right? And those flags say levels. So if you're taking a class or a lesson, somewhere you've signed up for a lesson and there was a little chart that said, how long have you been riding or skiing? Is this your first time ever? Are you an intermediate? Just to give you some bearing and orientation. In that process, you have to self-identify yourself based on some criteria that might be relatively quantitative and objective, like I've been riding for 2 years, and then also might be relatively subjective, right? Which is like, I feel confident at these things and not at these. Regardless, you self-identify yourself according to that little grid, and you say, I'm a level 3. Then you go outside and you find the flag that says level 3. You will find other level 3s who may or may not be level 3s for the same reasons you are, but they've all rallied around level 3 flag. And you're about to embark on learning, or whatever you want to use the lesson as a metaphor here. Versus the experience of riding and just going up the lift, riding. If you ride or ski enough, you probably have had the experience where, whether you're with people or not, you end up on a lift with some other people. You may even strike up a conversation with someone and say, hey, do you want to do a few runs together? And regardless of your skill or your preemptive self-identification in comparison to others, whether it's shared skill level in this case, or shared values, or shared goals, you actually just find yourself riding the lift chair together. And in that conversation, you see each other and you go, wow, you're a human, I'm a human. Do you guys want to ride down this trail together? We're having a fun conversation. You do that. You do it a couple times, meet some strangers, ride some trails. Maybe there is this unique thing that happens that also I think is a good metaphor, which is when you're riding with strangers like that, you see how they ride, they see how you ride. You feel a little inspired to try some shit you might not normally try. You don't have to like do anything dangerous or crazy, but it's just neat, right? Metaphors are strong here, guys. And then you get to the bottom after a few runs and you part ways, you know, whatever. To me, those represent two different
Very much so.
things. And if you guys can follow me in the analogy here, I hear what you're describing, Kyle, as the flag version. And I find myself drawn more to, and a bigger proponent for in my work, the latter version, where just the finding and the realizing that it's happening. And I'm not making a value judgment. I think probably both play important roles. But I've again, this is a scenario where just the talking through of this has me thinking about where these show up in work and in collaboration, and how clear and deliberate people can be about this. Because, you know, to that end about, there's also the question of like, why we're even using language at any given point in time, right? Am I trying to convey an idea? If so, I'm going to use longer strings of words to be exacting, rather than try to find a super compelling and poetic single word from another language where it might have that moment where it hits, but I'm betting too much on that they'll have a context or that the translation will be right. So
Right.
versus if I'm trying to simply create that moment of, then I might choose differently. Is my communication to transmit information, or is it a bid for affection or a bid for connection or recognition, right? So interestingly, when you shared your Substack, even though I probably, if you'd asked me, can recognize what you were sharing it for in the spirit of whatever, I can't help but look at that list and go, what am I going to do with this? So what does that tell us?
That's interesting. So,
Meanwhile, I have my own collection of those words, dude.
oh,
It's
sure.
more, it's the collecting of the glossary, which I know you're not putting out into the world and being like, here, everyone use this.
Learn
Like,
all these words,
it's just a fun
integrate them into your
exercise.
language.
And you were
right?
like, here, I just made this cool finger paint thing. Why don't you guys have a look,
Basically,
right? You know,
yeah.
like, so I get that. It's just an interesting thing to see what now I want to ask other people who read it or who saw it, like what their take on that was. Because my assumption is
Same.
that most people would be like, this is really cool. It's kind of inspiring. Like, am I the only weirdo who was just like, yeah, I don't need that?
My assumption, and this is why I didn't put any context into any of my experience into it, because I didn't want to color it. All I said was like, here was a little bit of my methodology, just a tiny high end of it. I figured people would scan through it a little bit, not read the entire thing, 147 words with definitions and all that kind of stuff. But somebody might find that word resonated with me. And that might be it.
Yeah.
And then well, what does that mean? Where did that go? When you say resonate, where did that take you? And it might be nothing. It might be like, I don't know, that was the thing that I was feeling last week that I couldn't put my finger on. Or that was a way that I've been trying to tell this story for a couple of months and I couldn't quite do it. But now I have a slightly different way of thinking about that. That's really interesting. As a sense-making tool, that's really interesting. That's kind of that's my assumption. I haven't heard any real feedback, though.
This is interesting because it's making me think, too, like my gut response, too, as I'm listening to you say that, is like, people use quotes in the same way. People have little favorite poems or short stories. Maybe less and less these days do people have like books or whatever that they might reference in this way. But having read the most recent data on young people and reading and writing, but there's I have a giant collection of quotes that I don't keep for like trotting out in pieces I write. I keep them like flypaper in the same way that I could imagine you adding to that list if you find new words, right? So it's not lost on me in that way, but I'm like interrogating in myself. Why is my instinct to be like, if that's how you engage with this person, audience member who would read Kyle's Substack, why is it words that you're reaching for rather than any number of other things, which again could be other text oddities and bits, could be, again, a poem, a song lyric, whatever, but it could also be non-text based things. I know not that semiotics has to factor in every chat we have lately, but like non-word based signs and symbols for things. So interestingly, I kind of feel like I'm just I'm unveiling on myself a weird bias against words, single words.
That's
I'm kind of realizing right now. I'm
that's
kind
an
of like,
interesting bias to have. I
am
don't
I?
like words.
I just literally wanted to be like, am I word racist? Problematic, but no, because I
gotta
fucking love words. I
explore
love
that.
words, and I don't actually. Wait, I should back up. That was a joke in more the sense that am I wordist and classist, not word racist. Like I discount the words Kyle came up with because it's
Right.
No, hopefully people know that. That's not
Yeah,
how it
hopefully that
But-
was clear, I think.
But it's more like because I like love words and I love wordplay, and it almost is like, it feels to me almost akin to, instead of collecting really meaningful songs or song lyrics, it's like notes or chords. It's like, I need more than that. I need more. Now a chord could be super, super meaningful and charged, right? A particular chord, like the beginning of a famous classical music song that everyone knows that just goes, or a chord that, or the, the couple notes in the old, the original text message noise, or like, there's so many like There are individual notes out there that carry a shit ton of meaning and nuance and context because of the place they occupy in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not to say that individual notes can't do exactly what these words do. I think that's the analog, the parallel. But it feels to me like, man, I just am going to reach for something else, something.
I might say they might not do those things. Not for you and I, anyway, as native English speakers. And this is, as you're talking, this is what's occurring to me now. So I'm going to talk out loud and drone and spin it for a moment.
Yeah.
Forgive me. So
we'll see at the end if I forgive you or not. I don't promise forgiveness in advance to anybody.
I'll ask later. So there's an abstraction here because these are words that don't carry any weight when we walk into it.
Right.
Now, it's sort of insulting to say your Hindi language is all abstract to us. It's obviously got a lot more, it's got plenty of depth and history and relevance to it. Yeah. It's just lost on us, right? So, but in this, as a single word floating out there, without the context of it being culturally embedded, without the conversation, without the relationship, without the other words surrounding it, it's just a word. And we don't necessarily have creative license to play with it the way that we do English words. And we're not going to co-opt it into something else. We're not going to name an app or anything like that. So somebody will, but not us. That's not what I'm suggesting with any of this, of course. But you take a lot of creative license with the English language. I try to. I think you're really fantastic at it, especially with the metaphors. This isn't something you can kind of grab by the reins the same way. It really has to sit on the side and be, this is a different thing. Don't touch. You can look, but don't touch. And that's probably a little bit distant to an extent. It's more like a, I don't know, it's almost more like an anecdote to me in that abstraction. Or there is almost a semiotic component to it, where it is a thing that carries weight, not for us necessarily, but that representation, that word, I can now describe because I've got other words around it, and I'm describing it not as a word I just invented off the top of my head and gave meaning to, but it has cultural relevance and structure that's been refined over however many generations. So it's a living body at the end of the day. I'm just calling it out.
Right. So it's kind of using these words not as actual words, but as symbols now, because they are foreign to us in the true sense of unfamiliar. There is some, I'm sure there's also some aspect of this that is, it's unfamiliar. It triggers our novelty, sensitive sort of processing circuits. And we go, ooh, that's interesting and different. And you're telling me it describes this thing perfectly that I have no language for? Like, so there's, I wonder in a way if there's probably people out there who actually study semiotics deeply. There is probably a word for this exact thing happening where you take what is concrete text, but actually it sort of transforms into its symbolic version by virtue of it being a language that we don't speak. Because as like we've been talking about this, I've been thinking to myself, as someone reads a list like that, or just anytime someone encounters something like this in the world, when some author somewhere goes, take this word from some language, it actually means this, and somebody has that experience of like, holy shit. Would you have the same experience if that word was just an old English word you don't know, rather than coming from another culture and another language, right? Like you could dig up some like, old English word that really hasn't been used since, say, I don't know, like the 1500s or something, or even like 1800s. Like let's talk sort of modern times-ish. But it's a word that's just gone out of use in fashion, and it turns out that it means this exact thing. Now, would it have the same impact to know that it is from our language, from another? So how much of it is knowing that you are importing a word, but that you have to have the translation for it to get it, versus rediscovering something that is from a more familiar sandbox, and what all those things imply? And the other is, how much would it work if it's having the instant translation serve your Rosetta Stone process versus having to learn enough of the language to then piece together the understanding of the word. Because if we talk to a native, Greek, so I've used some Greek words in some of the things we do with topology, because part of the fun of the word topology is some of the root Greek words that go behind it. So like, again, we get playful with it. I'm also really careful about that. I do a lot of research, right? And one of the things I know is that there are, of course, modern everyday versions of the Greek words, and then there are the ancient meanings for them. And, it's lovely to pick some beautiful ancient Greek word that has all this meaning, but in everyday 2026 Greek, it doesn't have that profound meaning. It means something else. It just means like street instead of like, place where ideas come from or whatever. So basically, I think there's something I'm interested in here. Maybe it doesn't have a resolution in today's chat, but is how much of the meaningfulness of even finding words like that tied to the fact that they do come from a different language, not just that they're not yet known, but that they have this like implied, it's from somewhere else, it's truly novel, and how much of it is being kind of like the shortcut, bridging the synapse immediately to meaning. I didn't know what this word means, and now I know what it means because there's a little translation told me, versus learning the language enough to then learn that word. Because again, a Greek speaker or an Arabic speaker, or the Swedish word, like a Swedish person are they gonna be like, oh yeah, this word is really great and profound, it's really nice that it describes? No, they're gonna be like, this is just my bathwater that we're in. So
right. Well, all right, so you set this up perfectly for me to kind of wind this back to awe a little bit, because
fucking pro, dude. Yeah.
Nice setup, thank you. Yeah, we didn't plan that. This has not been rehearsed. We didn't script this. When I'm never sit down and say, okay, we've got a plan for awe in this workshop. We're going to orchestrate.
I hope not.
Awe or
We will
anything
never
like
speak again if I ever hear you try to do that.
No. But I often am thinking the ideal outcome of what we're trying to generate here is a bit of catharsis. I think I talk about that with some regularity. And it's not a thing that I can say the success metric for this workshop or our time together is that everybody has a shared catharsis. But I do say that I feel like catharsis happens through that intersubjective sense making and learning, and what we can do is create a diverse set of experiences, create conversation, add some provocation, put some visual sense making in there. All of those things create a platform that allow for a bit of catharsis, and it's interesting. Catharsis, as we're talking about awe, is sort of in line, but not the same, but similar. It's not, I'm overwhelmed by this thing, but it is a sort of unlocking. It is a shift of that. It's that where that stuckness becomes relief. And that is, I mean, I think when we're at the end of our workshops or whatever we're doing, our joint work, our participatory work, and people are talking about, I saw something different, or I had the aha, or now I know what to do. They're talking about a degree of catharsis. Whether or not it was, full body goosebumps or not is a whole different thing altogether. And so let me take the shine off of catharsis as being a moment of clarity, so much as a relief from stuckness is more what I'm getting to. And that's really the objective, is to see something a little bit differently, or to have a realization, or to gain some information that you didn't have before, that you can now get from abstract to experience and be able to fill in, to sort of move that equation around, so that you can now say, now I can move forward from this spot where I didn't think I could before, or I'm going to shift direction a little bit before, where I think the direction that I will move to next makes me feel better than the direction I was moving in before. Something along those lines. That, to me, is the catharsis I'm talking about. How did I make that jump from what you were just talking about? I don't remember. But that's the... awe is not the thing that I don't expect any of that to come from we're doing some visual sense making. We're throwing a bunch of stickies on a board and we're talking about them. We're interrogating the language that we're using or the experiences or stories that we've had in that space. Awe is not going to happen, I don't think. I've never seen it happen and I don't expect it. But a little bit of, shit, I never realized that. And I don't mean this all as a momentary thing either. Because I think when we talked to Wendy Muma, I said, like, and I think she said, warm data, you kind of walk out of that. It's a 2-hour session, and it's deliberately a 2-hour session because you need some time to digest these things. And it makes a lot of sense to spend days meditating on what you've heard and digesting all of that. You kind of need it to wash over a bit. And so that ability to hear something different, acknowledge something a little bit different, is not that momentary thing. It might take weeks, not just a few days coming out of that, something like a warm data or like what we facilitate. You're generating a bunch of notes.
I'm just writing.
I'm now starting to drone, so I would
No,
love to hear where you're going.
You're not. I am above all so intrigued that you use the word catharsis. I don't think we've talked about this explicitly.
Okay.
First question, do you know the band Catharsis? They're from your neck of the woods.
I know the name, but I don't know.
They were in like late 90s, early 2000s. They've toured recently. They've played some stuff. You reunited, but actually I don't know if they're putting out new stuff now or not, but they might be. But
No.
hardcore punk kind of anarchistly from North Carolina, not like right where you're at, but
Oh.
yeah, your neck of the woods, meaning down there in that region.
There's only like 5 hardcore punk bands, and basically everybody just talks about corrosion of conformity.
They're not hardcore.
Well, either that or DC, and DC is a whole other story altogether.
We're going to be off and running in a wrong place.
Right.
Arguing about genres.
If you're talking about North Carolina, then it's just corrosion of conformity.
The difference between blunt versus scalpel terminology and genres and music. But anyway, well, I just laugh because you say Catharsis and immediately I think of the band because I actually am wearing Trial was another band from that era, sort of in that same soup. Anyway, catharsis is an interesting word. I am like, this is really, because even though I know that you are not the type of facilitator who takes some kind of personal pride in being the vehicle by which someone has like an epiphany or something. Right. Like this isn't about Kyle the therapist or Kyle the coach, like being centered.
We're not gurus.
Catharsis just carries some meaning that I am like, oh. Now that doesn't mean that's how you see it, so that's part of it. But hearing you describe it, okay, I'm getting it, but to me it's still it's an outcome that is not even necessarily, well, you may disagree with me, but I don't necessarily feel it's necessary for certain other things.
Agreed.
You might feel that way or you might not.
Nope, I do agree.
But to hear that, like, at least what I'm hearing is that you do take some level of, I don't know, like joy or delight or that you feel that it is meaningful, that you can help facilitate the possibility for that is something that is good for you. But I hear catharsis too, though, and I think about you're purging something. It's not just relief. Now, I know you didn't say that, so I'm like, all right, we don't have to argue over the definition of the word catharsis, but you went straight there, which tells me you've thought about that word in other times. Like it's right at hand for you. So the notion of catharsis as a person having a cathartic experience is an outpouring and a sharing, and like, you get imagery of like even purging, like literally vomiting, like not, whatever, in like literature and in spiritual meanings. But even if I tone that back down and just take at your words, at your description, catharsis, that could be the result of something you've convened, is not something we've really talked about before. It is really far away from how I like to think about work I do. I think we have
Interesting.
found something where we are really not we're
And
not
you're
in
not
disagreement.
anti. You're not
Huh?
in. It doesn't sound like you're like, I don't want to
No, no,
touch
yeah,
catharsis. How do we
this is a
prevent
lot more like
catharsis in my sessions?
no, no, that's exactly it. Like this isn't me being like you're an idiot for thinking
Right.
this way. No, it's more just recognizing that there are some really. I'm always in search of places where you and I have really different
Right.
interpretations
So we don't just
or
congratulate each
preferences.
other.
Because
Yeah.
otherwise, this is just like it's not even an
Yeah.
echo chamber. It's just an
Right.
amplitude of some one single wavelength that is increasingly boring for people, I'm sure. But this is one where I think our phases might be different because the notion of like catharsis sits to me as being again something personal, even if it's happening in an interconnected way or it's made possible by this collaborative process. Gosh, I'm just like I'm not speechless, but I'm just like, ooh, this is so different from how
So
I characterize the role of me as a facilitator of a process. And there's a whole other conversation for us to have later about containers and convened sessions rather than distributed sensing and fields of things. And if I have a little effect over here, I don't think that the notion of like anything that happens inside a container is worthless because it's in a container and the minute people leave it's all gone to naught. I think that does happen quite a lot. Maybe it is the norm, but I do think there is some potential for convening of things to serve as moments where some piece gets changed enough that the field can reconfigure, and I might not control how that happens, but I know that it is still made more possible. It changes energy gradients, we'll put it
right.
that way.
Yep.
So that's an aside, but to say that catharsis is a piece of the process that you take some level of meaning in for yourself and your role. Gosh, I'm trying to think about like the analog for me, the equivalent answer for me, because it is almost at like the other end of the process instead of I hear catharsis, so I also think it's afterwards. To your point, it's either at the end of or the conclusion of, or if there is no end or conclusion, it's at some later point. Maybe it's in retrospect or reflection that
That's usually it. Yep.
and that
It's
for
usually
me,
not the word that people use when they're
no,
expressing
yeah,
it.
nobody's like
Yeah. That was so
Kyle's
cathartic.
ecosystem mapping really resulted in a meaningful catharsis.
Whew, for all of us.
Right,
Yeah.
I totally get that we're speaking in like
Yeah. But
not that kind of language.
how would you think about when whether it's a student that suddenly the light bulb goes off,
Yeah.
or whether it's a bit of self-discovery that happens
Yeah.
when somebody goes, shit, that thing unlocked, now I can see how those pieces fit together. Those sort of things. Those are the moments that
Yeah.
I'm referring
Well,
to. How would you think
yeah.
about those?
So and I don't mean this to be like, well, I would use a different word, but it's going to lead to the rest of my answer. I think that people use the word epiphany for those kind of things more often.
Sure.
So there is an interesting thing to think about. What are the differences between catharsis and epiphany? If we want to get into our etymologies.
And what word do the Germans use? Let's dig into that. How many words do Germans have for these things?
Well, so, but to that end, so those moments, okay, those are cool when they happen. And when they happen either within view of me or when they happen later, but somehow it's shared back to me. Someone draws some kind of like red thread back to like, but even just in them, and these don't have to be, so this is why epiphany is not the right word, because it also is, again, has this implication of like
Grandiose,
profundity, and it could also just be, I once described this, I think on this podcast, where one of my favorite activities when I was a physics teacher was when I would introduce the equations of motion, and we would talk about like things falling and gravity, and there are like these really everyday standard little demos you would do, one of which is that you fire a ball off horizontally and you drop one. It doesn't push, it just gets dropped, right? So it falls under free fall. And listeners, if you know your physics, both of these balls will hit the ground at the same time.
Right.
And it's like counterintuitive because we kind of build up a way of knowing how the world works with other things in the mix, like friction and such. But if you've got two objects, like a steel ball that doesn't experience too much air friction, gravity is pulling the same on each of these. If you give it some y momentum or some y acceleration to start, it doesn't matter. So the y and the x are completely separate. And I would show kids this, even if they saw it on paper, experiencing it. I'd have kids who are like, or just a vacuum tube where I can actually suck the air out of the tube and I can drop a penny and a feather. You know, you drop a penny and a feather under normal circumstances, like the penny goes fast and the feather does this, right? But suck the air out so there's no more friction, boom, they both fall at the same rate. Again, we can say this, and I think a lot of adults would be like, yeah, duh. But when you're like 13 or 16 or whatever, and you see something like this,
so Richard Feynman putting the O-ring in the ice water at the Challenger.
So that's a good one to contrast. Okay, but point is, I wouldn't call any of these an epiphany, right? Because I just don't think that's too strong of a word. But taking that as an example here, I don't feel the need to put a word on it. You have some examples now. The difference is, now Feynman doing that in front of Congress was trying deliberately to create that oh shit, what the fuck moment. Right. His goal was to generate that moment with a specific end in mind. That's a different use case than being in a classroom in a more generative and open-ended kind of purpose to facilitate conditions in which students can come to a learning. Or to think about it this way, and this applies to my work with like adults and clients now today, even if what we're doing looks nothing like learning, but the notion is not just the difference between teaching and facilitating learning, which is my shortcut phrase for this, but it's, think about it this way. How do you come by critical thinking skills? Or how do you build empathy? Okay, you can build a curriculum where I teach kids, like, here's what critical thinking skills are, here's what we're going to do, here's what we're going to practice them, here's what it means to have empathy, here's how we're going to practice it. All of that's horseshit. I mean, does it have some level of effectiveness? Maybe. But the most effective way to build these kind of things is to create environments where they have to develop those things to succeed, to exist.
Yep.
And so in some ways, to me, the epiphany moments are completely extraneous and not even part of the equation for me, which is insane to say out loud, because the paradox here is that to operate in a way where those are not my goal is the way to ensure that those things happen. I like that they happen.
Right.
But they are not my goal.
Yes.
And so to operate in the way that I am not trying to achieve that ensures that that is more likely to happen. What I am doing is figuring out what I have some level of direct influence on that I can change and maneuver, again, conditions, affordances, the usual, in a way that either requires or simply makes it easier, like energy gradient speak here, that folks will build or come to some of those opportunities or realizations. Now, in like, that's so vague, but like say in client work, or you're talking about convening people in a way that they engage in some visual sense making together, they have their Kyle Godby branded catharsis, and then something is shifted in a meaningful way. For me, like to give the equivalent, it might, let's take like as many identical initial conditions as possible. It's a workshop, or it's a session, or it's a program. People have been convened. We engage in some shared sense making together. For me, it's more in that I do not even care what happens, and if people have a cathartic experience, an epiphany, a positive or even a negative experience, they could hate it and think I'm a whack. Like, it doesn't matter. For me, it is much more about simply the attention that I can bring to things, which I'm saying in general sense, probably needs unpacking later, and what my presence or the other things that accompany me reconfigures in a way to make something else possible. So the shared bit, thank you all for coming on this journey with me. I should have just figured out what I was going to say in one sentence, and then I'll cut the earlier part, but too late. The thing that is common between you and me and what we just both said is the unstuck part. Okay. And there's an implication that you and I believe that people we're working with are stuck, which is itself problematic, because stuckness is a diagnosis that I don't know that you or I are qualified to make. And I don't know that even if someone else is describing what they're experiencing as feeling stuck is always apt. There are plenty of scenarios where I don't think anybody I'm collaborating with is stuck at all. But to just take it as that sense that something flows differently.
Sure.
Okay. And that
Yep.
I think is where we are aligned, that
Yep.
we are doing whatever the fuck we're doing with whatever words and language we want to use to do it, to make it possible for things to flow differently. And
Hmm.
it's not a result of what you or I do or say, it's just our presence and the things we might be doing with other people in the room,
Right.
again, change some kind of thing in the field, or the energy gradients are shifted so that once we're gone, all that can continue to happen.
Hmm.
But for me, there's so little attention paid, even internally in my own reflection on my practice, to whether someone experiences an epiphany, experiences a catharsis, has a pause. I love getting all that knowledge, dude. I won't lie. If someone says, "Hey, this is the most useful thing I've been part of in the last 6 months," which I've gotten as feedback recently, and I had someone tell me this was the best leadership offsite I've ever been part of, I was like, one, that's incredible to hear. I love that. Two, you thought of this as a leadership offsite. You know what I mean? So it's like, there's
Yeah.
definitely, I love that, just like anybody loves
Sure.
positive feedback. But
Hmm.
damn, man, it's just a paradox. Like, I don't even think about that shit because, anyway, I've gone on too long.
No,
So,
no, 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 no,
is
no.
there a contrast here? Like, I think there is. Is it meaningful?
No, I'm glad you said that you can't plan for it, because then you will create conditions where you can't do it. That's a good component that I left out. I think I think it's less about. I think you said it though. You could care less, but it doesn't mean you're not still putting the energy into that sort of thing. Whether or not you're, I don't know.
Well,
Whether.
let
Go
me
ahead.
add a quick addendum, and maybe
Mhm.
this will help with whatever you're about to say, and if it doesn't, you can ignore it. But it's not an indicator of a successful outcome in any way for me.
Mhm.
So a session where, or a partnership where, an ongoing thing where people aren't going, "Oh, I didn't think about it that way," or, "Oh, I feel so much relief that we can talk about this way," or, "Oh, we finally have some shared language." Like, I have been part of processes and I have facilitated things where everything was successful, and I felt and the others felt that everything was worth it, and it helped and it changed how things flow without the epiphany, the catharsis, the other stuff. I think that if those even accidentally become the required little marker of something working or shifting, you really you miss that, like, there are plenty of other possible unfoldings can happen that never have those markers, that never show you those things.
I agree, and I think I opened by saying this isn't like the success metric
Yeah.
of.
Yes, you said that. But but see, I think it's a step further than just, we can't measure our success based on this. It's more like, it's not, like, that's why I say it's not necessary or sufficient. It's
But
neither.
there's also like the number of these sessions I've either been a part of or facilitated, where we can, and this is it's only come to my light to me in the last maybe week or two, with something like estuarian mapping, where we're talking about energy gradients. We can sit down and we can talk all day about what might be accessible and what could be done, what we think might create a more beneficial outcome or next iteration. But whether or not people are actually compelled to do it is whether or not they find meaning in it. And it's usually connecting that meaning that, whether you intend to or not, brings that catharsis along, because that meaning means there's some degree of investment, and that connection of I'm now compelled usually is closely related. And this is where I say it's, you're right, it's not necessary. That compulsion is it's a close cousin to that catharsis. And I find that it's important to bring the meaning into the conversation. I think you agree with that.
Yeah.
But in that way, I find the language that supports that meaning, that I found meaning in this. It allows me to move forward. I'm the meaning where I found this meaningful before, where my identity was attached before, where I was invested before. I wasn't able to, I hate to say capitalize, I wasn't able to find fulfilling because it was in whatever state it was in. But now I'm able to move into something that looks a little bit more attractive, accessible. It's more compelling. This is what I'm calling catharsis, and I might be taking a little bit of liberty with that, but that's at the core of it. That's the language that I'm hearing and reflecting back. That's not the objective, but it is something that I consider important in what I'm doing.
So you use the language of like, say people are engaged in like whatever method, anything, estrogen mapping or otherwise. There's a million and one ways that people could be identifying like things they might want to do or try or whatever. And to your point, if even if something feels possible or influenceable or within reach, doesn't guarantee that anybody's going to actually want or
Where does the energy come from?
take energy. Okay. But here's where when you said that, everything that followed, I was kind of like, oh, but see, wait, because for me, if that condition isn't already present, we're not even going to identify what those possible things might mean. So for example, how do I make this really I'll make this really super concrete with like the actual estrogen mapping, like exercise, which part of me is like, God, I swear to God, guys, we do things other than this out here in the world. But like, it's maybe it's a good common one for people that are probably listening to this. You've mapped actants onto the energy time grid, and you can kind of get a good sense of the landscape. So at some point you don't always have to go any further, by the way, too. I have found there are times where you don't actually have to take the step into identifying potential actions for this to still be a valuable process. More often than not, that's the whole reason people convene. But to that end, when you get into the mode of saying, okay, what are the possible actions or micro interventions that we can see available to us in this landscape that will help us achieve more desirable ends, right there is the point where why would you ever even identify actions that people don't feel motivated to take? So it isn't, let's just list all the possible actions that are available to us based on how we see the actants arranged, or let's go through and for every actant or cluster of actants, let's identify some possible actions that would apply. I don't usually fuck with that. I go from, hey, stand back and look at this landscape. Where are you drawn to? What are you looking at? And it's a way of answering what you're saying, which is, where's the energy?
Yep.
Because by virtue of saying you don't have your assignment now is not to come up with actions. Your assignment is to figure out where are you being pulled, and that alone then does not alone, but like on its own, without extra work, that allows us to see where meaning will already live. And so even if I see this huge potential, like red blinking, like possibility right there, if everybody else in the room ignores that, that tells me that they know better than I, because this isn't my landscape. So I'm an idiot who's like, I think there's a red blinking right there. Go after that. And if everyone else is like, nah, I don't need to know why. It might be because they already know why that won't bring energy to anybody. And even if it, quote, has potential, it has all kind of downsides, or so-and-so tried it last year and touching that again right now is a third rail, but nobody bothered to say that out loud in the mapping process because it just didn't come up. Like, there's any number of reasons. So to me, the meaning problem is solved in the process of people being allowed to then identify where they want to go next. They're driving that. I'm not driving that bus. They're driving it. Right. So if you put them in the driver's seat, meaning is already where they're headed. And I'm just making sure that we don't let anything get in the way of it, rather than anything that might lead to a cathartic process by which meaning is allowed to emerge. Now, this could also just be a function of differences in terms of who you and I are often working with, or the contexts in which we're working. But that's why I made the face when you said it. I was like, I don't need to do anything or to look at something like a cathartic experience to ensure what comes out is meaningful, because it's built into what precedes it.
I think you just described what I do as well. You just double clicked into the high level that I was describing of, I need to make sure that there's a provocation that we're talking about meaning or what we're compelled to do or what we see.
Would you use the word meaning in the room?
In some rooms, sure.
I usually don't. I could if people wanted to, but I don't bother.
Yeah.
This is just, I think, different audiences.
Yeah, or I use motivated probably more often than meaning. It's
I don't even
probably
get that explicit. I just tell folks after, usually if we've done something like mapping of this kind, if there's more than one map or more than one group, they've done some process by which they've looked at each other's maps. And, you have the usual conversation. What do you notice? What's different? What's surprising? Blah, blah, blah. But I keep it as high level and oblique as, all right, what are you drawn to? What's standing out to you?
see in my 20 years of mostly participating in workshops and facilitating later on and understanding intrinsic motivation at the tail end of that for the most part, or at least the deeper into the second half of it. I've spent so much more time in workshops or in these convenings where there's we're put in a position where here's the puzzle that's in front of you.
Yeah.
You're being challenged to figure out what the
Yeah.
solution is. You're performing in front of your peers and your superiors. And really nobody gives a shit about what they're presenting at the end of the day. So to just kind of open it up, I think that is, at least my bias is, that's almost, I don't want to say default mode because that's a little bit dismissive, but I think that there is an attractor there within organizations, large organizations that I've been in anyway, that needs to be overpowered to an extent by provoking towards what are you motivated towards. I'm not asking about the puzzle. I'm asking about you, Jen. What are you motivated to engage in on this? So that permission again sounds a little bit dismissive, but it kind of, permission is the way to go.
Yeah, I wonder if some of this is partly the difference between being in-house and being an external person coming
Yeah.
in. Because to your point, and I've kind of run any number of like sessions, but the ones where we really do need to, at the end of the session, have a concrete list of, whether it's tactics or strategy or whatever
Next
and I
steps.
always look at it as whatever the excuse is for convening this group in order to have that happen. At the end of the day, we still need to come up with something concrete, and it can't just be performative, to your point. In the places where we've really needed to take it further along, I've not really ever had to adjust what I just described, but more is that I do draw on other tools beyond just the high level estrogen mapping process that gets to the point of identify, there's like the action typology that they have, which I use sometimes, but with lots of modification, and other times kind of differently. Like I start from that because I think it's solid, but I think the process by which you carry that forward is where a lot of what you're getting at probably factors in, which is beyond just, okay, what are you drawn to? Okay, but we really do need to actually come to a point where we have something actionable, buzzword alert,
Right.
or something that everybody in the room is like, yes, actually, let's meet tomorrow at 9 to like carry this forward, right? And that happens as a result of what I've described. But I think, you can't just stop at what are you drawn to. I'm leaving out that there's a process after that, whether it's, I've actually noticed that in some of the estrogen mapping, I haven't seen the more recent trainings, but I've seen that they've got a little template for like in an intervention, like you've identified an action that you want to take. What do you actually build now? That's where like I feel like design picks up where some of the other stuff leaves off, and has lots of tools and processes that aren't like static processes, but that are, whatever it is, the chops, the craft, however you want to describe it, for thinking through what does this actually look like, that allows for people to actually hone that into something that they feel is downhill for them, rather than let's make a nice long list that everyone's going to be happy with at the end of today, but most of it is still like tomorrow it's going to feel too heavy and we're going to ignore it. So ensuring that you come out of something like that process, or any number of other workshoppy activities, can't just be, oh, we wrote a bunch of things on bullets. Again,
Right, of
sometimes we
course.
stop there because that's where a group wants to go. But more often, if you want to have a place where this leads to actual some change of some kind, I think a lot of it happens just in the but for me, that doesn't change the where are you drawn to, because in the reckoning of what comes after that, And if I have time, that's often where I'll do more rounds of things like ritual descent and otherwise, because it gives people a chance to hone the ideas or the plans. I will sometimes actually give people a chance to see anything that's come out of that part of the process, kind of listed out as, okay, well, on your map, you guys were really drawn to this. On this map over here, that group as a collective or as individuals were drawn to this. Let's put them all up and give you the chance. If you actually want to go talk about that instead, go over there, and then, you can basically
Sure.
move around and you let people glom on to the one that they feel
Hmm.
has meaning and feels like they can make a meaningful difference on, feels like it's downhill energy for them. And those to me are like usually the two biggest factors that I see play out, plus any number of other reasons why someone may want to be involved with honing or shaping something that's going to continue.
Sure.
And so for me, that comes out. Anyway, long story short, it's fair to say, though, I like you.
We're in agreement at this point.
I think that this is probably helpful for people who listen to these things here, because again, we fly at such abstract levels, but like, hey,
Right.
man, we're talking about nuts and bolts, like workshop facilitation at
Yeah.
this point. And the meaning stuff that Kyle was describing earlier, it just shows up differently. I do think there might be something here in the difference between running this for colleagues or colleagues doing this versus me being an outsider and coming in and inviting or being, something different, an anomaly to the process, which opens up something that is different than internally. I don't know, because I've been in-house, but I've spent most of my career in professional services. So yeah.
That is an interesting way to break it down. I hadn't considered that. There's two other things to pile on to that, though, which is that I've seen an interesting breakdown when you talk about what are you compelled to do when there is an assumption that it can create. I've seen senior leadership look at why are people collecting around this? I wouldn't have expected that. Why are tell me more about that. Like, I wouldn't have thought that this was that important, but what is the attractor there? So we're at a different level of sense making now. We're at a different level of
Wait, why? Why is
sorry.
that? Why is that at a different level?
Well, we're
Do you mean in the session, or do you mean like after the
yeah,
fact?
within the session, absolutely, yeah. And not at a different level is a different way of describing that, but we're just hitting we're provoking another conversation there. It's where you're that question around meaning allows for some divergence, and then to start exploring what are those clusters and what are those gaps and what are those weak signals and why. So it's just another opportunity to explore that space, not in a what's the world we're living in, but how are we interested in the world that we're living in? How do we want to engage walking out of the room with the world that we're living in? The other thing that's interesting is, and I've seen this in prioritization, because when we get to that next, what are we doing next when we get out of here? What's our to-do list? It's not just the lotus eating of we're all going to go do the things that make us happy and we want to go,
Yeah.
all of the exciting, happy stuff. There's
No.
also the acknowledgement of, oh shit, somebody has to do the dishes and nobody wants to do it.
Yeah.
And then
It's all part of a
somebody
9 to
has
5.
to say, yeah, all right, Jen, thanks for taking one for the team. And when that doesn't get acknowledged, then it's a whole different shit show. But it gives that opportunity to have that conversation. And all right, well, yeah, we still have to do the banal minutiae that keeps the engine running, all that kind of stuff. But we can acknowledge the people that are signing up for that sort of thing, allocate for it, et cetera, et cetera. So we're saying the same thing at this point. I just
Yeah, that's what I say.
relate
Both
that
of those-
to that
Yeah.
meaning and catharsis are closely related, because I find the other core component of this also is, why do people show up at the workshop in the first place? Is it because somebody told them you better show up?
Yeah.
Or is it
Or they've
because
been invited.
yeah, or is it because they're actually invested in what's going on and they want to know more? They want to accelerate something, they want to elevate something, they want to move past something, they want to fix something, air quotes. And so I don't want to bring people in under duress. That doesn't do any good. And so it's also a component of have to we have to sort of satisfy. And I don't know that there's a way that I can actively satisfy that, but I have to acknowledge that if people are compelled to show up on their own, they're volunteering, rather than it being compulsory, then that investment happens outside the room. And really when I talk about this, generating is the wrong word, creating the opportunity for catharsis, it really is just that same stuff we talk about with participatory sense making of, we're going to provoke some questions, we're going to create some diverse points of view, we're going to mix things up and allow people to have some conversations. And if everybody walks out and says, I learned nothing, I got nothing out of that, well, that's a learning. For me, it should be a learning for everyone that we went through that exercise, and there's a stability there. I've never had that happen.
Yeah.
It usually ends up either there were a bunch of ahas, and they were different ahas for different people at different levels with different degrees of impact, and it wasn't consistent. There were people that walked out that had big ahas, and there were other people that walked out that said, that was an absolute waste of my time. There's also that was validating, and that was a bit of an aha. It wasn't that I learned something new, but I found that I wasn't the only one telling that story. And obviously everybody has their own experience within that space, and there's gradients for all of these, but that's where I go back to with the catharsis. I label all of that as catharsis, and because I see that in the form of relief.
Interesting. So relief is a word I would totally get into. Catharsis, I'm still like, yeah, no. But everything you've just described and the two things you mentioned earlier, these are all phenomena that are almost always present in my experiences too. So maybe at the end of the day, it is just word choice.
Well, back to words. Do we have the right word for the thing?
Right. But I do think, to your point about, like, who's involved in even deciding that this convening is happening. That's one of the other things that I think is probably part of just material everyday practice that we don't talk about a lot, but it is rare for me that I'm truly just like rolling in and doing a workshop as an isolated thing and rolling out. You know, we talk about like workshops because I almost feel like at this point they're like, it's the design material that we're working with most. Yeah. But like instead of, making wireframes or designing with clay to shape a car or shoe or sketching, a product before it's like workshops, are my pencil. And that's like way oversimplified, but I think that creates this kind of thing where we're just always talking about workshops. But for me, the conversation that leads up to it chronologically and the things that are happening around it, like relationally and spatially and such, are all part of this, usually this partnership that I am engaged in, like that is bigger than just like this container of a workshop. So to that end, I mean, there is always that question too of why someone is here. And the reality is, I mean, because at the end of the day, most of what we're talking about is part of the working world, exchanging labor for compensation. Sometimes people are only going to show up because they're told to show up. And frankly, I got no problem with that because all of us are kind of showing up because we have to show up.
Sure.
So at the end of that day, it's like climb higher and higher through the rushing nesting dolls and like, cue your Don Draper meme. Like that's what the money's for. But to that end, I think having that be part of the partnership and the process and the collaborative nature of things might be one of those other places where I and my work and my role as a firm that works from externally versus being inside an organization with a different level of leadership puts me in a different position. But even all that said, I also really firmly believe that like if it's kind of like old, cars with standard manual transmissions, sometimes you can't get them to start, but as long as you pushed them downhill and got it rolling, if it was rolling enough, you get the clutch in there, you're good to go, and then the engine can start. And so this is one of the reasons I'm very comfortable working in circumstances that don't feel like they're totally aligned with, and you are like this too, I know, the values of everything we talk about here, because what might not be aligned right now with the values that we're talking about with complexity might become that over time through action rather than advanced convincing or selling or persuading. And it's a lot like maybe that car, it would be more ideal if that car would start on its own but sometimes you just get the car moving downhill by whatever means. Someone's pushing it. I'm just like flashing back to being in college and two of us pushing the car, and then, one of us jumps in once it's rolling and then puts it in gear, and then you're good to go. Hurry, get in before I let it come to a complete halt, and then off we go. So there's some of that at work for sure. And I think at the end of all of this, where I think we're coming to, and I'm looking at the clock too, we should probably wrap, but where I think this is arriving is that, sure, we have different word choice, but that same experience of like, man, I'm so glad I have a word for this. One of the last things I did in recent work with a group of leaders at a pretty cutting edge tech company who you would think would already have certain language for some of the things we're talking about. One of the most resounding things I heard out of them, even over the course of our collaboration, was, oh my God, it's just so validating. It's just so validating to know, to hear about, to have these lenses on the things that we're doing, to see and feel that there is some coherence to what we're experiencing, and there is coherence to some of the methods or means by which we might collaborate differently going forward. And so maybe the relief piece is where we can link up and say, I don't, again, aim for it, because if you aim for it, that's not it.
Right.
But
Yes.
but I will say that if I ignore the need for it, fine. What I'm doing is going to deliver some level of that coherence, and it is not mine to deliver. It is merely me to be present, and then if they want to arrange things further, they will, and if they don't, then they choose not to for their own valid reasons. But I'll take relief, not catharsis.
Okay.
And I don't get any great joy out of that. I mean, to that end, you as Kyle, I think, take a level of personal fulfillment and joy out of seeing others feel belonging, feel relief or catharsis. Mm-hmm. And this is one of those very personal things that's not it for me. I still haven't figured out how to articulate what it is for me, but it's much closer to being at the front end of that and knowing I might have just been the pea under the mattresses for the princess, or the grain of sand, or the seed in the nucleation process we talked about a couple weeks ago, or the impurity that, sparked the crystal. And it's not that I want the personal, I don't want receipts on that or anything. I don't really take a joy in knowing it was me personally. Right. But if I'm going to exist in this damn world, whatever decision I was part of prior to instantiating this form for this journey and this particular consciousness for the years that I have it, if I'm going to be walking around through this world, it's sort of just what am I doing that reduces suffering, and in the process of that, making enough money to live. And weirdly enough, instead of going off and becoming a Ram Dass type, it means working at somewhat ethically gray zone organizations and just being, by virtue of presence, that little thing. And that is how I sleep at night. So that's why I say I think you and I are after the same thing, but where my brain sees it is focused more on that piece of it rather than what's happening on the user side of it. But we're just
so interesting, because I heard you say the same thing.
Yeah,
a small amount of there was a change in the crystal formation or an impact in the mattress, and that had a rippling effect, an unknown butterfly effect.
But I'm talking about how I'm the crystal or the thing, and I don't know what effect it'll have. It may be catharsis, it might be anger, it might be nothing, it might be blah. To me, it's okay. My job is done, even if the princess doesn't notice the pea, or if the impurity is not large enough for crystals to form, or
I see.
If that doesn't happen, I am still at peace with my presence being that thing. And if it doesn't have so it's that orientation to the sort of, that's why I keep saying the sides of the equation, or I don't know. I don't want to say user, because it's not like I'm a thing and that's a user. Right. You know what I mean? But
I see the human impact as just one person going, that's a little bit of relief. That to me is really, really satisfying in a not in a everything's changed. I don't have any delusions about how deep that could run. But to me, I find that exciting because, and usually that's mutual. Usually, it's almost always mutual. That's not like I came in and imposed a thing, or I introduced a thing, or I. It's relational in almost every case that something happened that changed us in that space, whether it's a single person or a couple people in a room or whatever have you.
Yeah.
It's mathesy.
It's mutual. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It's the same sort of satisfaction I get out of sort of cracking a joke and getting a laugh.
Yeah, of course. Scratches an itch. There's satisfactory. Like at the end of the day, some of this is probably hardwired from an evolutionary standpoint, like altruism and other factors that are part of survival. And we recognize some part of what we're doing is serving the survival of our species. And so these are the things that we are wired to find some dopamine or serotonin flush from. So, yours is that, and what I'll say, just because as I listen, I'm kind of recognizing now, I think we're saying the same thing, so don't get me wrong. I'm loath to talk about the impact on the other people because it doesn't feel meaningful to isolate the impact on an individual. That's it for me. And which is not to call out and say, oh, you're too focused on the individual.
No,
but it's more the language choice for me is that it's a little bit like, I also take as much joy in that there are the non-tangible or non-human or non-individual things that have changed. And that I know is implied in your description as well. But there's just an orientation or a framing around it that comes along with mine that I'm like, yeah, this is kind of why I almost never really I love when I hear that feedback. I get that same satisfaction when I see that impact, but it's like, I actually will take away almost as much satisfaction from other forms of impact or change that actually aren't in the individual, that might show up in those other weird intangible ways that you can almost only sense like indirectly or in third and fourth order like downstream effects that you don't see forever, if ever. Like there's something in that nature of it that I've realized as you said it, that it's less about the reason I can't bring myself to say I care about an individual having a cathartic experience is because to me that's the word individual is the problem.
Yeah, this always happens. We're winding down, and the biggest can of worms gets cracked open.
Set something for the next
I want
time.
you to get on the couch now because I want to know: have you ever felt any futility in this work, or have you ever questioned, like the feedback loop is
none
not?
of us is getting out of here alive, man. This is all futile.
You know what I mean?
My answer to that question is absurdism, the philosophy, not the word like absurd humor, absurdism. We could set that for another. I know our next couple, we've got guests. Get ready, guys.
Right.
But the next time you and I are solo,
I love absurdism.
You want to talk about
would love to
futility?
Go down that road.
And did you ever know I have it's gone now. Used to say absurd.
Perfect.
Part of it faded, which is very much part of the.
How does that fade?
It fades really quickly because the tissue is those cells are turning over so quickly. So from my understanding, and this was almost a joke. I mean, like not a joke, obviously it wasn't a joke, but like, don't get me wrong, guys. Anyway, but there's, it's a really well-known area that like some people get something done and it's there forever. It's dark as ever. Some people it fades right away. It's everyone's got a theory about it, what you do when you let it heal, whether you do something right away, like, flush with Listerine and don't eat for a while, or whether you do everything like normal. I actually had it done. The guy who's done all my other work, we were joking and talking about it, and he was like, I'll do that. And I'm like, okay, let's do it. So at the end of a session one time, he did it for me. I love it. But he was clearly like uncomfortable doing it because he knows that this is one of those areas that doesn't usually heal and stay. And if you're an artist who's like living is on the quality of the work, he's like, I'm not going to tattoo like the bottom of people's feet either because it never heals well. And so he was doing it for me as a friend, but I could tell he was nervous. So he had a very light touch. And I think that's probably why. So then like a year later, he actually touched it up and did it again. And so you can see that the A is the lightest because I think he started a little too light and then went a little harder. So anyway, if you know anybody else with lip tattoos, like it's really inconsistent just because the tissue doesn't heal the same way. And so the ink, it lets the ink go too quickly. So on that note,
Okay.
we'll talk about futility, and we'll talk about none of us is getting out of here alive and what that does for anyone's practice or life in general, and impermanence and absurdism. We'll tee that up.
In feedback loops. It all fits in here. It absolutely does.
I believe you. Anything else to say before we go?
Oh, yeah, you've got me running downhill on this, and then we got to pull the plug, though, and hit the next one. But we'll have notes for next time. It's just us.
Let's both jot down our thoughts, and then 3 weeks from now, we'll try to remember what the hell we were talking about.
We'll be on something else.
Perfect.
Yeah. All right.